On the 11th day of Christmas, Moose brings to me the creator of Final Destination, Jeffery Reddick.
Welcome, Horror Hounds, to another installment of the 13 Horrifying Days of Christmas. I'm your host and gift giver, Moose. Today's gift is the gift of generational paranoia. That's right. We're going to talk about a film franchise that has created an entire generation of paranoid drivers and flyers and anything that involves looking at things sideways. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm talking about Final Destination. And I couldn't think of anyone better to bring on than the creator of Final Destination, Mr. Jeffery Reddick.
Hey, how are you? I love the paranoia. Like, that's gonna be my thing now. It's like I bring paranoia.
So
that's my superpower.
prior to my daughter watching this franchise, we were on a road trip, and there was this truck, big log truck, and I got boxed in behind it, and I'm freaking the hell out. I'm like, I've got to get out from behind this thing. And she's like, "What is wrong with you?" I was like, "Oh, I haven't introduced this to you yet. You wait till we get home." And then we get home, and now she's watched the franchise. She's like, "Oh, I get it." And even now, so like we'll be on the road, and she'll be looking. She's like, "Dad, you need to move over. Move over. Dad, move over." I'm like, "I got time. Hold on."
The thing that I love about that scene in the second movie, and the fact that it's kind of become like the scene that people keep memeing about, is after the first movie, like, I was working with the producer on coming up with the story for the second one, and they were meeting me. They were meeting like every other horror writer in town, which is fine. That's how they go. But we really liked the story, but that I came up with. But Craig Perry, the producer, was like, we need a bigger. It was originally going to be a hotel fire. The kids were going down to Florida for spring break, and they got in a hotel fire. And he's like, we need something better. Like, come on, Jeffrey. And I was driving home to Kentucky to visit my family, which is actually kind of ties into where the first story idea came home. Kentucky. You can blame all this on Kentucky. And I got behind one of those log trucks, as one does in Kentucky, and I pulled over I always pull over, and then it hit me, like, and then I pulled off the highway, and I called the producer, and I was like out of breath, and I'm like, "What about a log truck on a freeway?" And he's like, "What? Slow down." I'm like, "What about a log truck on a freeway?" And he goes, that's the opening. And so I'm so glad that, because that's one of my favorite openings. It's not my favorite of, there's many favorites for horror franchises, but that, because I think the other writers on the project, Eric Bress and J. Mackey Gruber, did a great job on the script. But we hired, or the studio hired, David Ellis, who was a stunt, had done a lot of stunt work, to direct the movie. And he was an amazing director. He's no longer with us, but we knew that he could visualize that whole segment better than anything that we could write. So we just kind of said, here's the scene, the chain snaps and the logs fly down the highway and mayhem ensues. And then he just choreographed such a brilliant scene. I love that scene.
Well, and it's rare that such an, I don't want to say odd object, but that one object can, encompass at this point a 5-movie franchise. Like, everybody looks at the log truck and thinks Final Destination. I mean, it's instantly recognizable to this franchise. And
it's pretty cool.
it's astounding that, this essentially something that prior to the movie you would pass every day on the interstate, just completely that's a truck hauling logs, that's a hauling pipes, hauling, whatever, not a care in the world. And now there's at least a generation of people who have it ingrained in their head not to be behind that truck. That's crazy.
It's pretty, like, because I'm a lifelong horror fanatic anyway, so it is really cool. And yet it's I'm very great. It's just one of those things that people will send me. I probably get, I'm not exaggerating, on average 5 a week of some, there's somebody will put a TikTok video up or something, and somebody will send that to me and be like, I know you've probably seen these and you're sick of them. And I'm like, no, the horror fan in me is very happy to see these because, um, yeah, it's just, it's hard to make movies, and, it takes a lot of super talented people to bring it together. And we've had some great directors and writers on all the films. It's a franchise I'm very proud of, but it's, it's interesting to see something go kind of to the next level where, 20 some years later, like people are still sitting around log truck memes. Um, and Devin Sawa posted something. There was like a Christmas truck um, full of trees, and he posted something about it. And then like, they, the People magazine's writing about it. Like Devin Sawa from Final Destination find a Christmas tree, and it just cracks me up. Like it's just cool.
Yeah, it's weird because now this is a movie that deals with fate and death, so no real physical bad guy per se.
Yeah.
No murder weapon. It's not Jason has his machete, Freddy has his claws. Scream and Michael have their knives. It's a iconic weapons. Leatherface has his chainsaw. Final Destination has a lot of great kills, but no like iconic weapon, and yet log truck.
Yeah.
It's just
I do kind of wish we had something so I could have a toy. But that's the only thing. And it's interesting because that's part of the history of the franchise. Because when I first wrote it, it was an X-Files script to get an agent. Because at the time it was like, you had to write something for something popular on TV. So I had Scully's brother have a premonition, and the adults got off, him and a bunch of adults got off the plane, and when they started dying, they thought he was somehow killing them or something. And I never sent it to the X-Files show. I just used that to get an agent because one of my friends at New Line, Mark Hoffman, said, "Oh, this is a great idea for a feature. You should develop it as a feature." So I paired up with Craig Perry and Warren Zide, who were two producers that two of my friends started working with. That's why this business is always like a long journey to get from the inception of an idea to screen. And we had the hardest time convincing New Line to buy the project because they're like, we don't get how you can have death be the killer. Like, we need an actual killer. So, we fought them on that for a long time, but then finally, just to get them to buy it, I put like an angel of death in there. But the angel of death didn't kill them directly. It was basically, my original version was very Nightmare on Elm Street influenced. So death like played on their survivor's guilt or something they felt bad about. And they were very like Nightmare on Elm Street scenarios where the person would end up killing themselves. So that was Death's MO in my original draft. And the studio thought that was too dark.
Fast forward, multiple years later, and you get Smile.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I never even thought about that. Yeah. But then, James Wong and Glenn Morgan, who'd done some of my favorite work on shows like The X-Files, but they've done so much more. They came up with the idea of doing kind of a Rube Goldberg thing where death kind of uses everyday things around you to get you. And I actually think that was much better because I think my nightmare version would have really appealed to like just horror fans. I think the concept of not cheating death and, death coming after you and killing you in the order you would have died is cool. But I think if the deaths had been like Nightmare on Elm Street-y with suicides, I think that would have just appealed to horror fans. And I think when they came up with the Rube Goldberg aspect, that really opened up the film to people. Like I meet so many people who are like, I don't normally like horror movies, but I love these movies. And I think it has opened it up to a bigger audience. So I'm really glad that it went that way. Because, and also one of the things when I didn't want to show death, I didn't want to, even with our Angel of Death, like I didn't want to tie death into any kind of cultural or religious background because I knew, these horror films travel, they play internationally and stuff like that. So I never wanted to tie it into a specific religion or cultural belief, um, because I think that makes it more terrifying. I mean, death. Everybody has to die at some point, and unless you're Buddhist, you're not afraid of dying, because if you're Buddhist, you're gonna, you know, be reincarnated. I think that's Buddhism. If I got that wrong, I'm embarrassed. But
Well, and so
and
yeah,
then I won't make.
death is the great
Um,
equalizer and the great unknown.
yeah, yeah. So I think tapping into that, what was, is what we really tried to do, even from the beginning of the process, was like try to keep this as accessible as possible. As far as everybody is afraid of death, and yeah, if you make it too tied into one culture, then there's a little level of separation where you're like, well, that's not how I see death, so I'm not afraid of it. So
Whereas now it's with the way the movie was set up, you end up being more afraid of everyday objects,
yes, yes,
and
yeah,
ultimately it does make you more aware of your surroundings. Um, and as I listened to you talk about the essentially the evolution from Nightmare to where the franchise ended, I think part of why it has such a wide reach is it has more of a mystery feel to it with horror mixed in than straight horror.
yeah,
Because it's all right, who's going to die next? How are they going to die next? And you start dissecting the clues right along with them.
yes. And I think that was another, and that's why I bring up Craig Perry a lot. But I worked with a lot of producers, and he's one of my first, but he's also one of my favorites. And that's no disrespect to any other producer I've worked with, but Craig is like, first of all, he's such a nice guy. Like, just he's one of those rare, like, nice people in this. He's not rare, I shouldn't say that, but he's one of those really nice people that also loves the genre and has a lot of respect for it. So you want those kind of people, because a lot of times you'll get a project picked up and you'll have one or two people on the team who are like horror fans, but then the other people don't know the genre or don't care about it. And so Craig always pushes. He always pushes for more, because I also, with the first movie, like, we had the basics set up, um, worked out between us, and this was another point where he's like, he goes, there needs to be one more layer than the fact that they cheated death and now death is coming after them. And so I'm racking my brain, and then it hit me one night. It's like, oh, well, what if they're dying in the order they would have died originally? That way Alex figures out, like, that there's a plan that death has, and so now he's got a chance to kind of maybe beat it. And so yeah, that whole idea of like them dying in the order, like setting up that mystery, was something that I was really. It was just another one of those. The creative process is crazy. Sometimes you'll write something and people just are like, "All right, we'll just make what you wrote." And sometimes when you develop it with people, you come up, especially if they push you to think harder. You know, it's like, all right, we got a great concept, but let's add something else to it. And so, that the whole design, like, that was something. And again, 2 days of like drinking a lot of Red Bull and coming up with a bunch of different ideas that weren't working. And then, yeah, super late one night when I was delirious from lack of sleep, I was like, yo, what if they were dying in the order they would have died in the crash? Oh, that sounds cool. And then I called Craig up. He's like, that's it. That's what I like about Craig too. When you nail something, he's like, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and
the,
so that let us set up a mystery and gave Alex something proactive that he could do to try to stop death.
there's a story I came across that I wanted to ask you about because
Mhm.
it's fascinating to me. And the more we talk about Nightmare and Final Destination, I feel this is the right time to ask about it. I heard a story that you you wrote a Nightmare on Elm Street prequel when you were 14.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. It's so funny looking back, because yeah, I'll tell you the story, then I'll tell you my takeaway from it. Yeah, because I saw Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 14, and it was a double feature with Alone in the Dark, and it was playing at our local drive-in. And I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and we were, didn't have a lot of money, so I know, like, for movies, my friend Tony Calhoun, who's also no longer with us. Death sucks. But we would sit on his dad's. His dad had a huge truck, and we would sit on his dad's truck and turn on the CB, and we could watch the movies from his backyard. So Alone in the Dark plays, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. And I saw Nightmare on Elm Street after that. My expectations were pretty low because I didn't realize till later that they did something in the processing of the film where where the film prints got washed out. So for some reason on the TVs, like the movie looked cheap, because it was just more washed out. That's
Yeah.
all. So I had no expectations for Nightmare on Elm Street, and when I saw that movie, it fucking blew me away. Like I was obsessed with it, and luckily because it was playing at the drive-in, that was the second run, so it was getting ready to come out on VHS, and I got obsessed with that movie. So I went home and I banged out a prequel, which I honestly don't remember a ton about it because I never kept it because you're not thinking, at 14 you're not thinking that far ahead. I just know that it was like Freddy killing people and the kids figuring it out, and then the parents. It was the typical what you'd expect a 14-year-old to write. And I sent it to Bob Shea at New Line Cinema. Like I looked up his information and I called and got the address and I mailed him my prequel idea, and he sent it back to me because he's like, we don't read unsolicited material, and I didn't even know what unsolicited meant because I was 14. So I just wrote him back and I'm like, look, sir, I spent $3 on your movie, so I think you can take 5 minutes to read my story. And he did. He read it and he got back to me, and he was very encouraging, but also like, you've got a great imagination. Definitely study, the formatting, study more, but you've got a great imagination, and, keep doing this. And so I stayed in touch with him and his assistant, Joy Mann, who was just like an angel in my life. Like she would send me scripts to read, and she would send me like toys from movies. And for some kid living out in Eastern Kentucky, like this was like
It is Christmas every day.
Every day, and so encouraging. I used to call her collect. I mean, I look back at it. When I met her, when I started working at New Line, I apologized, and she said, "Oh, I loved it." But I mean, I was like calling her collect because I didn't know any better. And so yeah, like I stayed in touch with them from age 14 to 19, and then I went to New York to study acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and they offered me an internship at New Line Cinema, and and that's all she wrote. Like I ended up working there for 11 years, and they passed on many of my other projects, but I'm so happy that that they made my first one. It's just very nice to be part of the house that Freddie built.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it sound when I tell the story, it sounds easy, but there were many years of like, again, like when I started working in New York, I was interning. You didn't really get paid, so I'm working as a waiter and living at the Y, and eating ramen noodles and writing scripts and having them get passed on, and learning that my writing definitely wasn't as they were very encouraging, but I never studied screenwriting, so I was kind of self-taught. But even when you're self-taught, it takes many scripts and many years to get to the point where you're ready for prime time. So I had sent them scripts that they would be like, oh, it got good coverage, but it's not right for us. And when I started working there, I went and looked up the coverage, and it was like, this script was obviously written by a middle schooler. And I was like, I was in high school. How dare you? Like,
I was older than that.
Yeah. So some brutal coverage, but I learned, the great thing about working at a studio like that, especially, I mean, New Line, when I was working there, was like at its prime as far as creativity, because Bob Shea was such a film lover, and still is. Like you couldn't ask for somebody better to be running a studio. He was such a film lover, and Sarah Risher was there, and Mike DeLuca was there. Like we were there at the heyday when they were so ballsy because they took a chance on Nightmare. Every studio had passed on it, so they were very much into taking calculated risks. So they made Blade when people were like, who wants to see a black vampire hunter? People kind of don't remember. A lot of people don't remember Blade. I know, we all fucking do. And it's like a lot of people don't realize like Blade was actually the first black superhero movie out of studio superhero movie. And they would just do The Mask. They would do all these weird movies that other people were like, this isn't going to sell, or nobody's going to go see this movie, and then they would. So But I learned how to collaborate, and I know how the business works, but I also learned not to take rejection personally, because I would see a lot of times, a great script would come in with no attachments, and then a bad script would come in with like an A-list actor, and of course they're going to go with the bad script, um, because of the star. That's just kind of how studios,
Comes with
who's
name
attached.
value.
Yeah. So I learned early on, like, to separate my ego from the process, and learn that my value as a writer wasn't determined by whether somebody made a movie or not. So that's helped me survive as long as I have, without being like a bitter, you know, jerk. Like, but yeah, like, I always give credit to Nightmare on Elm Street because it's had such a huge influence on my life and career. It's also my favorite movie, period. I mean, I've seen that movie so many times, and um, it had such an impact on me. And yeah, that Wes Craven was such a pioneer and such a one of a kind, like, filmmaker. Such a loss that we don't have him with us, but what a wonderful library and legacy he's left behind. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, fucking Nightmare on Elm Street's like just my favorite movie.
Well, then you took that perseverance and learning rejection at a young age and created what's become a very fast growing franchise. And I don't mean fast like, oh, every year we're cranking out a movie, but it's picking up new audience. Like the first one picks up a new audience every couple of years, and then that leaps to the next one, and then it just
Yeah.
keeps growing. And looking back, when you started on what would become Final Destination, could you even fathom it getting to 2, let alone we're coming up on 6?
I mean, I definitely, just because I grew up on the genre, I always thought sequel. I didn't. It was part of my DNA. It wasn't calculated, like, I've got to write something that's going to be a franchise, but I knew that I had an idea for, like, a sequel already. You know what I'm saying? Like, I did have an idea for another one, but I've seen so many other films where they don't have sequels, so I never plan on it. I just hope for it. Um, and not because I try to come up with stories where I want to know more. It's not like I want to just kind of tell a story and just keep rehashing the same thing over and over again. Um, so that's why I was with part 2. It's like I wanted to kind of, set up these 4 teenagers that you think are going to be the leads, and then kill the teenagers off quickly, except for Kimberly. And also with the sequel, I wanted to bring the OG players back, and I wanted to show that the fact that the people cheated death in the first movie had impacted all these other people's lives. So, like, everybody who was supposed to die on that freeway had a connection because they cheated death before, because the characters in the first movie lived. So those were the things that I wanted to accomplish with the sequel. And then, um, they took my story, and then Eric Bress and J. Mackie Gruber, who are fucking awesome screenwriters, like, they had some stuff that they wanted to do, and they had in the different characters, except for the returning ones, and Kimberly was always the lead, in both of our stories. But they wrote a really fun movie. Like, the second one's kind of my favorite, to be honest. Like, I love all of them in different ways, but there's something I think it's a log truck scene too. Like, I just have fun watching that one. Except I don't like that we didn't bring it, because I'd written Alex to come back as well. So Clear and Alex are supposed to come back for the sequel, and they could get Alex back, and they killed him off screen in a really stupid way. So that's my only sore spot with the second one is but then I'm like, you don't see him get killed. There's only a newspaper clipping. So there's that horror brain in me that goes, well, we never saw him get killed.
So maybe he's not actually dead.
I know that I would love to do that at some point, is to have them bring him back. But we'll see. I mean, the new one, yeah, the new one's like written and everything, and it's great, and we have such a cool team on it. And I still say we, because I mean, I'm not technically involved in the new ones. but I know what's going on with them, and you know, I again give all credit, especially for the first movie, to James Wong and Glenn Morgan for the Rube Goldberg story that they told, and the directing and everything on that film. Um, but it is my baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, it started off, I was with it for many years trying to crack that nut on how to get it made, and so it is my baby, and I love whenever they do a new one. And yeah, they got the writers of Scream with the story by John Watts, who did Spider-Man, and um, we've got the directors of Freaks, directing it. It's just like an A team of people working on the new one. So yeah, I'm just really so happy with it, with the franchise. Even, I don't, I know some people rag on the fourth one, but the fourth one, we just had to hurry that one out because of the writer's strike. That we just came out of a new one, but the strike was about to happen, so they just had to rush the script. So, but it's still a fun movie. Like, I watched it the other night. I'm like, yeah, I think the issue with the fourth one is they called it the Final Destination, which in horror terms, we always know that that's usually like the final chapter where we're expecting a lot of answers, like, oh, they're going to explain, who Tony Todd is, and they're going to do this, and and then so people saw it and they're like, wait, this was just, it's fun, but it's not like the final chapter of Friday the 13th where they killed Jason for a minute.
Yeah.
So, but I think expectations were so high, but the movie did amazingly well. And then I thought part 5 was brilliant. I showed it to a friend for the first time, had no idea about the twist ending, which, spoiler, I won't say what it is in case people haven't seen it, but yeah, he was like, what the fuck? I was like, yeah,
Right?
that's the good stuff. Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah, I do tend to ramble sometimes.
Oh no,
but
I love it.
But my feelings on it are, I mean, it just, again, I always go back to being a horror fan. Like, I'm just very grateful. I'm grateful that the fans, have supported the franchise for so long. I'm so grateful for everybody involved. Like, I mean, I got to meet Tony Todd, and we're like friends now, and he's amazing. And I'm friends with Devin. And I've, gotten to know all the filmmakers, and have had, just met some wonderful friends. And then also you meet the fans, and, that's why you do it as a writer. It's like, I certainly would love to have a couple of more studio films released, before I go. But if I were to have a Final Destination moment tomorrow, like, at least I know that something that I started, like, has made a mark in the genre. So that's a blessing that I always go back to whenever I start, like, feeling like down on myself, or like, oh, I'm not writing enough, or what am I, all the stuff that creative people go through. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, if nothing else, you definitely have a lasting legacy.
yeah, and I'm really proud of it. And it's also, again, it's just the fan interaction, because I used to be, on the other side of it too. Like, I mean, when I worked at New Line, I got to meet so many stars, and the only 2 times I've ever gotten nervous, we were doing a documentary on New Line called The House that Freddie Built, and they interviewed me, and they told me that Wes was coming in an hour, and asked me if I wanted to stay and meet him. And I'm a grown ass man at this point, but I was too nervous, because I was like, I don't want to be like that guy lurking around, and it's like, oh, he's waiting to meet you. So I left, and I was like, you idiot. And luckily I got to meet him at a premiere a couple of years after that. But I was like, he was like my idol, and I was just too nervous. And then the second one, which this will probably bring back some memories, but did you ever watch the V miniseries, the original?
Yep.
So Nightmare on Elm Street is to V is to TV what Nightmare on Elm Street is to me for movies. I'm obsessed with that show. And when I was directing a short, and I wanted to get Jane Badler in it, who played Diana, who is like one of my favorite characters ever. And she did the short. She was in Australia, so we shot her remotely. but she said, "Oh, she's coming to LA. She invited me out to lunch," and sat down for her, and that was the only time I've ever been starstruck. And I literally didn't know what to say. I'm like sitting there just looking at her, and she's nice and beautiful and funny and smart, and I'm just sitting there looking at her, and I'm like, I need a minute. I'm actually, now I know what starstruck is, and I just don't know what to say. She was so nice, but like that was the first time I've ever been starstruck. So it's like Wes Craven and her. Um, but I'm sure I mean, there's some people that I would get starstruck if I met them, but um, yeah, that was just the Wes Craven story cracked me up because I had a chance to actually probably have a professional
Like a proper
introduction.
conversation and a real
Yeah,
introduction and and you're
but
like,
he did
nope.
at the premiere. I got to say, at the premiere, he was so gracious because we ended up talking for like 15 or 20 minutes. We sat down and I'm always like, I don't want to like take their time, like I don't want to be that guy. But he was like, I did tell him kind of my story, and he was really impressed and grateful. He's like, oh, I'm glad my work's had such an impact on you and stuff.
So since I know you've been in in the loop about 6, is there anything that you can
You
share?
sneaky bastard. No, I'm kidding. What? Finish your question.
So is there
Is
anything
there?
that you can share that will I guess the movie doesn't really need hype, but just to kind of satiate the palate until the movie drops.
I mean, the funny thing is, I'm very careful, like to not say anything that's not public knowledge, because yeah. Um, but it's not the firefighters. I know there's stuff going around saying it's firefighters and first responders, which that was a version that they had that was really solid. Um, but that's not the version that's coming out now, and it's been announced that Tony Todd's coming back, so
Yeah.
I can share that, which you know does my heart really good because I personally I think he's just a crucial element to the franchise, and he's just such a amazing actor and guy. So he's coming back, and he's it's going to be more than a showing up to give a little information, like so. I think the fans are going to be really happy with that, and I think they're going to be really excited about the story too. Like it's, like well, like with part 5, I think part 5, aside from the twist at the end, they added a really interesting element to the story about, if you take somebody's life, you get theirs. And, this movie doesn't just kind of do that. It's not just a Final Destination movie where it's like same setup and there's just one new rule. Like there's actually there's a kind of a really cool story that is being a cool mystery story that's being uncovered.
See, it goes
And
back to its mystery with horror thrown in.
yeah, yeah, and that's all I can say. But I think again, this is definitely. I'm not just saying this. Like we have an A team on this one, and everybody involved like loves the franchise. This was not a cash grab by anybody. I mean, the directors, it's their pitch meeting, which on one level you're like, this is amazing. On another level, you're like, I hope everybody else doesn't start expecting us to do this. But they did a Zoom pitch for the movie with the producers, and as they're doing their pitch, they switched it over to like something they pre-recorded. So you're watching the pitch, and then all of a sudden there's a fireplace behind them that flares up, and they're like, oh shit, and it keeps going. And then other stuff starts happening, and like a ceiling fan falls on one of the guys. I don't know if it was Adam or Jay that it fell on, but yeah, it fell on one of them. And so the people watching the pitch are like, what the fuck? But it wasn't because of the shock value, because I talked to Craig about it, and he's like, most people don't get like Final Destination. Like people love, yes, they love the kills, but it's what's leading up to the kills that keeps them on the edge of their seat. It's like you said, how are they going to, is it going to be this or is it going to be that? And there's a lot of people that don't, kind of get the rhythm of a Final Destination movie. And in their pitch, like Craig's like, they nailed it. Like it was like watching a Final Destination scene over Zoom with these guys. And so that shows you how much they wanted this job. Like and how in tune they were. And so I think that's the key to keeping any franchise alive is, it's very funny because we had the first four, like it was like Glenn and James and me on the first one. I worked on the story with the second one with Jay Mackey Gruber and Eric Bress, and then James and Glenn came back for the third one. Then Eric Bress did the fourth one, and then in the fifth one they kind of started branching out to new people. But you had this core group of people on the first four that have been with this franchise for a long time and care about it, and then the people that they brought on after really care. Like that's the one great thing I think New Line and Craig make sure of is like nobody, we're not just going to hire somebody, to come in who's like, oh, I just need a job, like I don't care about the franchise, because we're very mindful of the fans, like, because obviously without respecting the fans, you don't have a franchise. And I had more conversations with Craig where we're talking and we'll talk about something and something will come up and it goes back to the fan. It really does. I mean, we know the kind of rules of the world of the movie, but it's really like, our conversations are about the fans, and it's not like a lot of other producers where it's like, well, we could shit another sequel out, every year for cheap and, make money. Like it's never, that conversation has never happened. And I think that's what makes these movies special. And I hate to say it because then I start thinking about how old I am, but it's been 13 years, I think, coming year since the first one came out. Or no, not 13 years. It's been has it been 13 years since the last one? It's been a long time. It's been a long time since we had a sequel. So
my joints didn't hurt when the movie came out.
yes. And I'm like, yeah, I wrote the first one. I was a savant. So no, 2011 is when Final Destination 5 came out. So yeah, be almost 13 years. So it's crazy when you think about it.
It's insane.
The time flies, man, but good things come to those who wait. So.
Oh, absolutely. So before we put this to bed, where can listeners follow you to keep up to date with any projects you're working on and things like that?
They can follow me on Twitter, I mean X, or Instagram. My handle is Jeffery A. Reddick on both of those. It's always frustrating with these because I try to, like, on Twitter I can follow back, or X I can follow back anybody. They don't have a limit on how many people you follow, but on Instagram you can follow as many people as you want, or there's a cap on how many people. Like, so I can only follow like 7,500 people on Instagram. And when I first signed up for it, I was just following everybody. I was just going through and seeing cute guys and following them, and then following cats and following, and then all of a sudden it got to the point where I couldn't follow people back. So I had to go back and start deleting some of the cats and people that I didn't know.
Goodbye, kitty.
Goodbye, kitty. So, Instagram is probably, there's a lot of, Instagram isn't as much of a minefield as Twitter, but I am on Twitter more because that's where I've gotten, I can interact more directly. But I update all of them, and the only reason I don't say Facebook is because they have a max of how many people you can follow on Facebook, and so I'm not on Facebook as much as I should be, not as much as I should be. I always feel bad when people write me and I don't write them back, but it's like, I'm busy. I'm working. I'm trying to come up with the next Final Destination.
And listeners, I will put the links to his socials in the episode description, and you can find me and other great podcasters over at electronicmediacollective.com. Or if you just want to look for me, you can head over to Facebook, Twitter, and now YouTube at Moose Media Inc. Just look for the Moose. And Jeffrey, this has been more than fun, and I have to have you back because there's so much that we didn't cover.
Yes, I'm much more than just Final Destination.
Oh,
but I love it. But I love Final Destination, so I'm always happy to talk about it.
As I say, to properly dive into Jeffrey's career, we would be here for a while. So You got to tease. Look forward
You got
to seeing him.
Little tease.
Yeah, he'll be back on the episode list in 2024.
Absolutely, I look forward to it.
Yeah,
And thanks for having me, and happy holidays to all the fans out there that are listening. And then here's to a great 2024.
couldn't have said it better myself. And until next time, Horror Hounds, mash on.
Mash on.